What if the person they tried to humiliate in public wasn't just another face in the crowd, but an off-duty police captain who had spent 2 decades fighting for justice? This is not just a story, it's a wake-up call. In today's Celebrity Undercover Stories, inspired by the unforgettable twists of Undercover Boss and Undercover CEO, we dive into the shocking tale of a black woman falsely accused of shoplifting, only to reveal her true identity in front of the very people who tried to tear her down. Why does this matter? Because behind the polished storefronts and polished smiles, there are systems that thrive on fear, profit, and silence. But when one woman decides not to stay quiet, everything changes. Stay with me until the very end, because what begins with handcuffs in a mall will explode into a movement that shakes an entire city, and you won't want to miss the moment arrogance finally meets reckoning. They said it was just another Saturday afternoon, shoppers buzzing through the bright corridors of Silverwood Galleria, families crowding the food court, teenagers laughing near the fountain. Sunlight streamed down through the skylights, bouncing off polished tile floors, making everything feel warm, ordinary, safe. But hidden inside that picture-perfect scene was a story that would shake an entire city. It started with one woman, walking through the mall like anyone else. To strangers, she looked like a tired shopper. To security, she looked like an easy mark. What nobody realized, what nobody could have guessed, was that beneath her calm smile, she carried 2 decades of service, a captain's badge, and the kind of resolve you only earn by surviving the streets. Her name was Captain Renee Collins. Now, I want you to pause for a second. Imagine being her in that moment. Off-duty, no uniform, just another customer looking for a birthday present for her niece. After a long week of paperwork and tough decisions at the precinct, this shopping trip felt like a breath of fresh air. A chance to be just Aunt Renee, not Captain Collins. She carried a brown leather purse, the kind she'd saved months to buy. It swung gently at her side as she walked, blending in with the crowd. She wore a simple navy sweater and jeans. Nothing flashy, nothing unusual. But sometimes, what people choose to see has nothing to do with the truth. Silverwood Galleria wasn't just a mall. It was a symbol of suburban comfort. Glass storefronts glittered with luxury logos. Perfume counters gave off sweet, sugary scents. Soft music floated above the hum of weekend traffic. And for Renee, the goal was simple. Find something beautiful for her niece Jasmine's 12th birthday. As she strolled past the toy store and a row of sneaker shops, her thoughts softened. She pictured Jasmine's wide grin when she unwrapped the gift. Maybe a charm bracelet, something with sparkle and meaning. Something that said, "Your aunt believes in you. You matter." For 8 quiet minutes, it felt like the world had slowed down. Just a woman shopping. Just an aunt thinking about family. But peace, as she knew all too well, rarely lasts. Renee caught movement in the corner of her eye. The reflection in a storefront window gave it away. 2 men, security guards, following her. Not close enough to bump shoulders, but not far enough to be a coincidence. The taller one, a heavy-set man with slicked back hair, pretended to study a map of the mall. His name tag read, Harris. His partner, a shorter man with nervous eyes, Mendez shifted his weight from foot to foot, stealing glances at Renee as if waiting for instructions. Her jaw tightened. She had been on the job for 20 years. She knew surveillance when she saw it, and she knew what it felt like to be marked. This wasn't new. Being a black woman in spaces like this, she'd been followed before. She had faced the stares, the whispers, the quiet assumption that she didn't belong. And every time, it cut a little deeper. Because no matter how many medals she'd earned, no matter how many lives she'd protected, here without her badge, without her uniform, she was just another suspect in their eyes. Harris lifted his radio to his mouth, not even trying to hide it. His voice carried clearly across the polished corridor. Black female, blue sweater, brown purse, keeping eyes on her. Renee's fists curled at her sides. The urge to turn around, flash her badge, and watch them squirm pulsed through her body. She could do it. She could end this game in 1 second. But she stopped herself. Not today. Today wasn't about proving herself to 2 rent-a-cops hungry for power. Today was about Jasmine, about family, about refusing to let strangers ruin a simple act of love. So she took a slow breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked into Aurora Jewelers, a boutique glittering with glass cases and soft lighting. A place where, for once, she wanted to feel welcomed. Inside, the air smelled of vanilla perfume. Smooth jazz whispered overhead. Behind the counter stood Victoria Harlan, a manager in her 50s, dressed in a crisp gray blazer. At the sight of Renee, Victoria's smile tightened, more polite than warm. "Can I help you?" she asked, tone clipped, eyes darting toward the purse on Renee's shoulder. "Just browsing," Renee said evenly, though her heartbeat tapped against her ribs. She moved toward the case of charm bracelets, rows of delicate silver and gold catching the light. Through the reflection in the boutique's mirror, she could see Victoria watching her every move. And just outside the door, Harris and Mendez still lingered, pretending to chat, pretending not to stare. Renee focused on the display, imagining Jasmine's smile. A silver bracelet, maybe one with a butterfly charm. Yes, that would be perfect. But fate was already moving. And what should have been a quiet shopping trip was about to become the spark that set an entire community on fire. Because in less than 10 minutes, Captain Renee Collins would go from shopper to suspect. And by the end of the day, the world would know her name. When Captain Renee Collins stepped deeper into Aurora Jewelers, she told herself to focus on the glittering displays, not the shadows pressing at her back. But once you've been a cop as long as she had, instincts don't turn off. They sharpen. And right now, every instinct screamed that she was being hunted, not helped. The boutique itself was a world of glass and sparkle. Shelves lit with delicate spotlights. Rings displayed like treasures under domes of crystal. Necklaces arranged as if waiting for royalty. Yet despite all the glitter, the atmosphere wasn't welcoming. It was suffocating. Victoria Harlan, the boutique manager, followed her closely. Too closely. The woman's perfume clung to the air like smoke, and her heels clicked sharply against the polished floor as she shadowed Renee from case to case. She didn't speak at first, just hovered, eyes flicking between Renee's face and her purse. It was the same purse that had cost Renee months of careful saving. A simple brown leather shoulder bag. She had chosen it because it was sturdy, professional, a reward for herself after closing a tough case. But in this boutique, on her shoulder, it wasn't a fashion statement. It was a target. "You know," Victoria finally said, voice loud enough for the other shoppers to hear, "all of these cases are locked. Only employees can open them." Renee didn't flinch. She kept her voice steady, pleasant, even though her heart thudded. "Of course. When I'm ready to see something, I'll let you know." Most managers would smile politely, then give their customers space. Not Victoria. She stepped even closer, her blazer sleeve brushing against Renee's arm, as if trying to block her view of the jewelry case. Her eyes narrowed, sharp with suspicion, and for a split second, Renee felt like she was back on the job being interrogated, not shopping. Outside the boutique's glass doors, Harris and Mendez were still stationed like guards in a cheap play. Harris leaned against the directory map, radio clipped to his shoulder, pretending he belonged there. His lips moved, words low but distinct enough for Renee's trained ears to catch fragments. Still watching. Subject inside Aurora. Copy that. Mendez shifted uneasily, hands clasped in front of him. His eyes kept darting toward the exit, then back at Renee. He looked like a man who had signed up for a job he didn't have the stomach for. And maybe, just maybe, he knew things were going too far. But hesitation didn't absolve him. Silence was complicity. Renee turned her attention back to the bracelets. One in particular caught her eye. A delicate silver chain with a butterfly charm, its wings dusted with tiny crystals that shimmered in the light. She imagined Jasmine's face lighting up, that squeal of delight only a 12-year-old could make. It was perfect. "I'd like to see this one," Renee said, pointing through the glass. Victoria hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the key ring at her waist. Her face tightened, as if unlocking the case was granting Renee a privilege she didn't deserve. Finally, with a forced smile, she selected the key, her hands trembling ever so slightly. As the case clicked open, Renee noticed how Victoria angled her body shielding the tray of jewelry from Renee's hands, as though expecting her to grab it and bolt. The distrust was blatant. "Pretty piece," Renee said softly, admiring the bracelet as Victoria lifted it out with theatrical care. "Yes," Victoria replied, though her tone carried no warmth. Her eyes flicked down at the purse again, and her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. Renee smiled anyway. She had dealt with tougher people in interrogation rooms. She wouldn't let one boutique manager steal her calm. But the walls were closing in. From the corner of her eye, Renee saw Harris's reflection in the glass. He was watching her with the kind of focus usually reserved for suspects about to run. His hand rested on the radio, thumb poised. Mendez lingered just behind him, scanning the boutique nervously like he wanted to vanish into the floor. And Renee realized the truth. This wasn't surveillance. It was a hunt. She had already been judged guilty. Every move she made, every glance, every brush of her hand near her purse, they were just waiting for a chance to pounce. She straightened her back, slipping into the posture that had commanded respect for 20 years. But she said nothing. Not yet. Victoria held the bracelet delicately, the crystals catching the light. Renee imagined placing it into a small velvet box, tying it with a ribbon, watching Jasmine tear it open. A normal moment. A human moment. That was all she wanted. But then Victoria's voice broke the fragile spell. "Actually," she said sharply, "before you continue, I'll need to take a look inside your bag." The words sliced through the boutique like glass shattering. The soft jazz overhead seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of shoppers whispering and phones buzzing. The air thickened. All eyes turned toward Renee. Her pulse spiked. Her face grew hot. But her voice? It stayed calm, almost quiet. "Excuse me?" Victoria's tone grew louder, steadier, emboldened by the presence of the two guards outside. "A piece of jewelry is missing from this case. I saw you slip something into your purse." It was a lie, a blatant, calculated lie. Renee hadn't touched anything but the bracelet that still dangled from Victoria's fingers. Yet already, she could feel Harris and Mendez moving toward the door. Her world had shifted in a matter of seconds. From shopper to suspect. From aunt to accused. And standing in the middle of Aurora Jewelers, Renee Collins realized this was no misunderstanding. This was the beginning of a storm. The boutique had gone quiet. too quiet. Shoppers who had been browsing earrings and necklaces froze in place. The music overhead still played, but it felt like background noise in a movie right before the villain makes his move. Renee Collins stood tall, her eyes fixed on Victoria Harlan, who still held the silver butterfly bracelet in one trembling hand. "Excuse me?" Renee repeated, her voice even. "You heard me," Victoria said, louder this time, making sure everyone could hear. "A piece of jewelry is missing, and I saw you slip it into your purse." The accusation dropped like a bomb. Heads turned, conversations stopped. A mother clutched her child closer. A teenage boy nudged his friend, phone already half raised. The hum of curiosity was giving way to the electricity of scandal. Renee felt heat crawling up her neck. Every part of her training told her not to react, not to give them what they wanted. But her fists itched to clench. Her body ached to shout back. Instead, she drew in a long breath and said, "That is absolutely false. I haven't touched anything but the bracelet you're holding right now." But Victoria wasn't backing down. Her lips curled into the faintest smirk, as if this moment was exactly what she wanted. She gestured toward Renee's purse. "Then you won't mind showing us what's inside." And just like that, Harris and Mendez entered the boutique, moving with the heavy steps of men who thought they had authority. Harris took the lead, chest puffed, hand brushing the radio clipped to his shoulder. Mendez trailed behind, his face tense, his eyes darting to the crowd that had started to gather at the door. "Ma'am," Harris said, his tone condescending, "please cooperate. Empty your bag on the counter." The words echoed, bouncing off the glass cases, landing on every set of ears in the boutique. Phones rose higher. Red recording lights blinked like warning beacons. Renee raised her chin. "I will not. I've stolen nothing, and you have no probable cause. You have no right to search my personal belongings." Harris smirked, glancing at Mendez as if to say, "Watch this." He stepped closer, using his bulk to crowd her space. "Lady, this is your last chance. Open the bag, or things get complicated." Behind him, Mendez shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. He kept glancing at the door, at the people watching, as if he knew how wrong this looked. Renee stood her ground. Her voice was steady, measured, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You've been following me since I entered this mall. You are targeting me because I am a black woman. This is harassment, plain and simple." A ripple of murmurs swept through the onlookers. Some nodded. Others whispered. A few phones zoomed in closer. Victoria's face flushed red, but she pressed on. "Either show us what's in the bag, or we'll call the police." Renee's heart hammered, but her face betrayed nothing. "Then call them. But you and I both know those cameras above us." She pointed calmly to the black domes mounted in the boutique's ceiling. "Will show I haven't stolen a thing." That should have been the end of it. But Harris wasn't about to let go. He leaned into his radio, voice low but clear enough for the crowd to hear. "Control Code 10 at Aurora Jewelers. Non-compliant subject. Requesting police backup." The words ignited the atmosphere. A spark turned into a blaze. People shifted closer to the entrance, craning their necks to see the suspect. Phones multiplied, hands shooting into the air like torches at a rally. Shoppers whispered furiously, some disgusted, some thrilled at the drama. Renee could feel her pulse pounding in her ears. Every muscle in her body screamed to act, to end this now, to flash her badge and shut them down. But she knew better. Timing was everything. And right now, the eyes of half the mall were watching. She drew herself to her full height, letting the calm authority of 2 decades in uniform settle on her shoulders. She spoke clearly, each word deliberate. I will not be humiliated into emptying my purse. You have no evidence, no right, and no probable cause. Back. Off, the crowd gasped. Some applauded softly. A woman whispered, "Good for her." But Harris only sneered, moving inches from her face. "You just made a big mistake." His words dripped with threat, but Renee didn't flinch. She locked eyes with him, silent, steady, unshaken. Behind Harris, Mendez rubbed the back of his neck, sweat beading at his temple. He looked like a man desperate to melt into the floor. But he didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched, torn between duty and conscience. And then, as if on cue, the low wail of a siren echoed faintly in the distance. Backup was coming. Renee stood perfectly still, her purse resting firmly at her side. Her eyes never left Harris's. "You're making a very big mistake," she said quietly, but firmly. The tension in Aurora Jewelers was unbearable now. Phones recorded every second. Live streams pinged with viewers. The story was already escaping the boutique, racing through social media, spreading far beyond the mall. This wasn't just about a bracelet anymore. It was about dignity, prejudice, and power. And the line had been drawn. The crowd held its breath as the footsteps of new authority echoed closer. Reinforcements were on their way. And Renee knew this was about to get worse before it got better. The siren had barely faded when heavy footsteps pounded against the polished mall tiles. Heads turned. The crowd that had packed itself against the entrance of Aurora Jewelers parted instinctively, like the sea making way for a storm. And there he was, Officer Logan Price. Tall, broad-shouldered, his badge gleaming under the skylight. His reputation preceded him. Everyone in the Westwood precinct knew the stories. Too many complaints, too many citizens bruised and silenced. Yet somehow he always slipped past discipline, connections, protection, a reputation for getting the job done, no matter how messy. But for Captain Renee Collins, who had read the paperwork and seen the complaints cross her desk, his arrival wasn't reassurance. It was a warning. "What do we got?" Price's voice boomed, echoing across the boutique like a showman stepping onto a stage. He swept his gaze over the crowd, then fixed his eyes on Renee with a grin that was more snarl than smile. Harris straightened, eager now that reinforcements had arrived. "Non-compliant subject," he announced loudly. "Female, caught concealing jewelry in her purse, refusing search." "That so?" Price asked, already moving toward Renee. His hand brushed against his holster casually, deliberately, letting the crowd see the weapon at his side. Renee raised her chin. Calm, controlled, determined. "This is a false accusation," she said firmly, her voice carrying to the crowd. "I have not stolen anything. I requested to view the cameras. That's all." But Price wasn't listening. He was performing. He closed the distance in 3 strides, his shadow swallowing her. Then, without warning, he seized her shoulder and slammed her against the glass wall of the boutique. The impact rattled the display cases, bracelets and earrings jingling violently against their hooks. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Someone shouted, "That's excessive." Another voice yelled, "She didn't do anything." The glass was cold against Renee's cheek. She felt the sharp press of Price's hand grinding into her shoulder. His breath was hot, close, venomous. "Don't tell me how to do my job," he hissed. "Hands behind your back." Now Renee's pulse thundered. Her training screamed at her to react, to use the defensive moves she'd mastered years ago. One pivot, one twist, and she could break free. But she didn't. She knew what would happen if she fought back here, surrounded by cameras and strangers. They'd twist it, spin it, call it assault, number. She had to endure. "This is excessive force," she declared loudly, making sure every phone caught the words. "I have rights, and you are violating them." Her voice, steady and clear, cut through the boutique like a bell. Price laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Rights? You've got the right to shut up." He yanked her arms behind her, too rough, the sharp bite of steel clamping down as the cuffs clicked tight. Phones were everywhere now. Red recording lights dotted the crowd like fireflies. A woman near the front was live streaming, her voice trembling as she narrated, "They're arresting her." "She didn't do anything. Look at him. Look how rough he's being." Price spun Renee around and shoved her toward the exit, raising his voice for the audience he knew was recording. "Should have just cooperated, lady." Would have been easy. The humiliation burned hotter than the pain. Each step toward the mall's main corridor felt like a public parade, a spectacle built on lies. Shoppers pressed against storefronts, holding phones high. Children stared wide-eyed. Strangers whispered, some outraged, some entertained. Renee kept her head high, though her shoulders screamed from the awkward angle of the cuffs. She had spent her career fighting against this very abuse of power, and now she was its victim. They pushed through the crowd, past the fountain, past the frozen food court. The afternoon sun spilled through the glass doors at the side exit, blinding after the filtered mall light. Price dragged her toward his patrol car, parked right outside. His voice was loud, smug, dripping with mockery. "Shouldn't have made a scene." This is what happens when you resist. Renee twisted her head toward the crowd gathering outside, their chants already rising. She knew this was her moment. The moment to reclaim her dignity, to speak the truth before he shoved her into silence. "Before this goes any further," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the parking lot, "I think you should know something, Officer Price." "Save it for booking," he snapped, jerking her arm as he reached for the car door. Her next words stopped him cold. "I'm Captain Renee Collins, Westwood Precinct. My badge is in my front pocket, which you would have known if you'd asked for identification before assaulting me." The crowd erupted. Gasps, shouts, cries of disbelief. "Did she say captain?" someone yelled. "She's a police captain," another shouted, holding up a phone for the live stream. Price's hand faltered, his grip tightening nervously before he forced a sneer back onto his face. "Sure you are," he scoffed. "And I'm the police commissioner." Nice try. But there was an edge to his voice now, a crack in the performance. He reached into her pocket roughly, his hand freezing when it brushed against the familiar shape of a badge. He pulled it out slowly, holding the gold shield up to the light. It gleamed, catching the afternoon sun. For the first time, his bravado slipped. The crowd shouted louder, voices swelling. "She's real! She's a captain! You just arrested a captain! Phones captured every second." The story was no longer contained to Silverwood Galleria. It was already racing across feeds, climbing hashtags, spreading like wildfire. But Logan Price wasn't done yet. His pride wouldn't let him back down. Not in front of this crowd. His lips curled into a snarl. "This is fake," he barked, but his voice had lost its authority. "You're impersonating an officer." That's another charge. Boos and shouts erupted from the crowd. "Liar! Let her go! We're streaming this." Renee stood tall, handcuffed but unbroken, her eyes locked on his, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I suggest you take these cuffs off." Right now, and in that electric moment, with the crowd chanting and phones raised like torches, Logan Price realized his grip on the narrative was slipping away. But instead of surrendering, he doubled down. And that was the mistake that would unravel everything. The gold badge glinted in the sun, catching every camera, every live stream, every eye in the parking lot. For a single frozen heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. There it was, undeniable proof that the woman officer Logan Price had shoved, cuffed, and humiliated wasn't just another shopper. She was a police captain, his superior, a decorated officer with 20 years of service behind her name. And yet, instead of letting go, instead of admitting the truth, Price clung to his pride like a man drowning. His knuckles tightened around the badge, his face twisting into a mask of anger and desperation. "This is fake," he barked, his voice cracking ever so slightly. "Another charge, impersonating an officer." But the crowd wasn't buying it. "She's real!" someone shouted from the back. "You cuffed a captain!" another yelled. "This is going viral!" a teenager screamed, phone held high. "Already streaming, thousands watching!" Renee stood tall, her wrists raw from the steel biting into her skin. She could feel the heat of humiliation burning inside her, but she kept her voice calm, steady, deliberate. "I suggest you remove these handcuffs, officer," she said quietly, "before you dig yourself any deeper." Price's face flushed crimson, sweat shining on his temple despite the cool afternoon air. He glanced at Harris and Mendez, the mall guards who had started this circus. Harris looked pale, his bravado shrinking now that things had spiraled out of control. Mendez wouldn't even meet his eyes. The crowd surged closer, their chants growing louder. "Let her go. Let her go." Price tried to tighten his grip, tried to keep control, but his swagger was slipping. He growled, "I'm taking you in." Verification at the station, resisting arrest, interfering with an officer. Keep talking, and the list of charges grows. Renee turned her face toward the crowd, her voice rising clear and sharp. "Every second of this is being recorded. Every abuse of power, every violation of protocol. Are you sure you want to continue, Officer Price?" The crowd roared its approval. Phones bobbed in the air, capturing every word. Price shifted on his feet, cornered between arrogance and fear. He'd built his reputation on intimidation, on silencing voices before they could rise. But now, for the first time, he was the one surrounded, the one under the microscope, the one about to be exposed. "Enough!" he snapped, jerking her arm to drag her toward the patrol car. "You're making this worse for yourself." "No, officer," Renee shot back, her eyes blazing, her voice unshaken. "You're making it worse for yourself." The chants grew louder, rolling across the lot like thunder. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" And then, a new figure entered the scene. A second cruiser pulled up, lights flashing but sirens silent. From the driver's side stepped Sergeant Daniel Brooks, his weathered face calm, his stride deliberate. A man who had spent decades earning the trust of the community, and one of the few officers Renee respected. "Officer Price?" Brooks called out, his voice carrying across the lot, deceptively casual. "Want to explain why you've got a police captain in cuffs?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones turned toward Brooks, capturing the confrontation. Price stiffened, his jaw clenching. "Sergeant, I was responding to a theft call." This woman claimed to be a captain, but Brooks cut him off, his tone sharper now. "That's Captain Renee Collins. Your commanding officer's commanding officer, and the badge you're holding, it's real. I suggest you verify that fact quickly before you end your career right here, in front of half the city." The silence was deafening. Price's bravado cracked like thin glass. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again, no words coming out. The handcuffs trembled in his grip as realization began to sink in. Slowly, too slowly, he fumbled for his keys. His hands shook as he unlocked the cuffs, each click of the release echoing like a gunshot in the still air. Renee rubbed her wrists, the red marks stinging. Tomorrow they'd be bruises, ugly reminders of a humiliation she hadn't deserved. But tonight, those marks were evidence-living proof of what had just unfolded. The crowd exploded with cheers, applause, shouts of victory. Someone yelled, "She's free!" Another screamed, "Post it! Post everything!" Patricia Wells, the mall's PR director, finally appeared, her heels clicking against the pavement, her professional smile stretched tight. "Captain Collins," she began loudly, her voice aimed more at the phones than at Renee. "On behalf of Silverwood Galleria, I want to extend our sincerest apologies for this unfortunate incident." Renee turned slowly, fixing her with a stare so sharp it cut through the facade. "Unfortunate incident?" she repeated, her voice dripping with steel. "Is that what we're calling racial profiling and police brutality now?" The crowd murmured, some even laughing bitterly at the PR spin attempt. "We will, of course, conduct a full investigation," Wells stammered, her smile cracking. "Our security protocols will be thoroughly reviewed." "Save it," Renee snapped, her voice firm. "Your cameras caught everything. I suggest you preserve that footage, because this isn't going away." The crowd erupted again, chanting her name now. "Collins! Collins! Collins!" And while Patricia Wells wilted under the pressure, Renee felt the shift. For the first time since walking into the mall, she wasn't alone. The crowd had chosen a side. And it wasn't Price's. But Renee also knew something else. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. She had seen this play before. She knew how fast reports could be twisted, how the official narrative could turn reality upside down. And sure enough, when she finally returned home that evening, the email was waiting. Subject line, Incident Report, for T99265. The file painted her as aggressive, combative, resistant from the very beginning. According to Price's version, she had lashed out, struck him, and interfered with mall security. The report was clean, calculated, and crafted to bury her side of the story. And it had already been copied to Internal Affairs, the chief's office, and the police union. Renee stared at the glowing screen, her jaw tight, her fists clenched. The battle was just beginning. The glow of the laptop screen lit Renee Collins's face long after midnight. She sat in her kitchen, shoulders stiff, hands trembling ever so slightly as she scrolled line by line through Officer Price's official incident report. Every sentence was a lie. According to the report, she had been combative from the moment security approached her. She had refused lawful commands, physically resisted restraint, and attempted to incite a crowd. And in one damning line, Price wrote that she had struck him with her elbow while resisting arrest. Renee let out a bitter laugh. She hadn't even moved except to keep her balance when he shoved her against the glass. But there it was, black and white, the foundation of a story that would be repeated in courtrooms and newsrooms until truth itself bent under the weight. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling. She knew how the system worked. First report on paper becomes gospel. Every correction, every rebuttal, every protest after that is treated as damage control. Price knew it. Harris knew it. They all knew it. Her phone buzzed. A name lit up the screen. Carla Monroe. Carla wasn't just her closest friend. She was a defense attorney who had spent 15 years battling the very kind of systemic abuse now threatening to swallow Renee whole. "You still awake?" Carla asked when Renee answered. "Sleep isn't exactly happening tonight," Renee said flatly. "Good. I'm on my way. I brought wine and egg rolls." By the time Carla arrived, Renee had barely touched the Chinese takeout she'd ordered earlier. The food sat cold on the table, cartons unopened, chopsticks unused. But Carla, with her usual blend of warmth and determination, forced them both to sit, eat, and breathe before opening the manila folder she carried. "I reviewed the report you forwarded," Carla said, pushing lo mein around her plate. "It's worse than I thought, Renee." He didn't just lie. He tailored the narrative to trigger an internal affairs investigation. He's trying to get you suspended permanently. "They already suspended me," Renee said bitterly, rubbing her temples. "Effective this morning." I had to turn in my badge and gun. Carla's eyes softened, but her voice stayed firm. "Then we fight smarter." "Because this isn't just about you. What do you mean?" Carla pulled out documents from her folder case files, arrest records, transcripts. "I've defended 6 clients in the past year, all black, all arrested at or near Silverwood Galleria. And guess who signed off on most of those arrests?" Renee leaned forward, her police instincts kicking in. She scanned the names on the reports. Officer Logan Price, Officer Harris, Officer Martinez. The same names over and over. Every one of them charged with resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, or assaulting an officer, Carla explained. Textbook charges you can't easily fight in court. Word of an officer against the word of a citizen. Renee's stomach tightened. "And how many took plea deals?" "Almost all of them. Because they couldn't afford to fight. And every plea came with probation. Not through the city." Through a private contractor, Carla slid another paper across the table. The header read, "New Path Supervision Services." "Private probation?" Renee muttered. "That's legal here?" "Legal and lucrative," Carla said grimly. "They charge monthly fees, drug testing fees, electronic monitoring fees. Some of my clients have paid thousands of dollars just to stay out of jail. Miss a payment? Back to court. More fines, more fees. It's a cycle designed to bleed people dry." Renee felt anger rising in her chest. "And Silverwood Galleria keeps popping up as the origin point for these arrests. Like bait in a trap," Carla nodded. "Exactly. And it gets worse. I traced Newpath's ownership. Guess who's behind it?" She pulled another sheet from the folder. A corporate registration form. Newpath Supervision Services, subsidiary of Harrington Holdings, LLC. Renee's eyes narrowed. Harrington Holdings wasn't just any corporation. It was the parent company that owned Silverwood Galleria itself. The same company that had employed Harris and Mendez. The same company whose PR director had tried to smooth things over in the parking lot. "It's all connected," Renee whispered. "The mall, the security, the arrests, the probation company. They arrest people, funnel them into probation, and cash the checks." "Exactly," Carla said. "And it's not just about harassment. It's about profit. Organized, systemic exploitation." Renee pushed away her plate, no longer hungry. She could feel her pulse quickening, the same rush she got on big cases when the pieces finally began to fit together. "Then we build a case," she said. "We document every connection, every pattern. We show the community what's really happening." Carla hesitated. "Renee, you need to understand this won't be easy. Harrington Holdings has lawyers stacked to the ceiling. They'll try to smear you, discredit witnesses, bury evidence. And you've already been threatened," Renee thought of the text message she'd received the night before. "Back off, Captain. You don't know what you're stepping into." She pulled the phone from her pocket and showed Carla the screenshot. "They're scared," she said. "Scared enough to threaten me. That means we're on the right track." Carla exhaled slowly, studying her friend's face. "You realize what you're saying? This isn't just standing up to a corrupt officer. This is standing up to an entire machine." Renee leaned back, her eyes burning with determination. "Then let's start unmasking it." But as she gathered the files and began to sort through them, She couldn't shake the chill creeping up her spine. If Harrington Holdings was willing to manipulate arrests, intimidate citizens, and rewrite police reports, what else were they willing to do to protect their profits? Somewhere out there, someone was already watching her. Someone who knew she had started pulling at the threads. And if she wasn't careful, the machine would come for her next. By the time dawn broke, Renee Collins' neighborhood looked the same as always. Quiet streets, trimmed lawns, the hum of sprinklers. But nothing felt normal anymore. She sipped her coffee by the window, eyes scanning the cul-de-sac with the instinct of a soldier in hostile territory. Every parked car looked suspicious. Every shadow felt too still. The night before had left her restless. The reports, the connections, the threat that had buzzed across her phone. She had gone to bed with her holstered pistol on the nightstand, a habit she hadn't had since her early patrol years. Now, as the sunlight painted the houses gold, she told herself it was just nerves. Until she opened the front door, her mailbox was overflowing, stuffed with envelopes that hadn't come from the postal service. No return addresses, no stamps, just thick paper, wedged inside like someone had crammed them there by hand. Renee's stomach tightened. She gathered the envelopes carefully, her police instincts kicking in. Inside, she spread them across the kitchen table. One by one, she opened them. The first contained a crude drawing stick figure dangling from a noose, the words, "Mind your business," pasted in jagged magazine cutouts. The second had grainy photographs, shots of her walking into the precinct, shopping at a grocery store, meeting Carla at her house. Someone had been tailing her. The third was worse. Photographs of her niece Kayla at school, walking with friends, sitting on the steps of the gymnasium, scrawled across the bottom in red marker, "Nice family you got there." Renee's throat went dry. Her hands shook, not from fear for herself, but from fury. The last envelope held a single photo. It was her arrest at Silverwood Galleria. Someone had drawn crosshairs over her face. For a moment, she sat frozen. The hate mail spread across the table like toxic confetti. The walls of her house, usually her refuge, suddenly felt compromised, violated. But after 20 years in uniform, Renee Collins wasn't easily broken. She grabbed a folder, slid each letter and photo inside carefully, preserving them as evidence. If they thought intimidation would silence her, they were wrong. If anything, they had just confirmed how scared the machine really was. By 8 a.m., she was in Carla's office. The lawyer looked pale when she saw the envelope's contents. "Renee, this isn't just intimidation. This is escalation. They're telling you they can get close. Too close." "They've already crossed the line," Renee said flatly. "Now we document everything. If they're stupid enough to leave this kind of trail, we'll use it." Carla leaned across the desk, lowering her voice. "I know you, Renee. You'll fight until your last breath. But these people aren't just playing defense. They're playing offense. They'll come for your badge, your name, your family. You need to be ready for war." "I've been ready my whole life," Renee replied, her voice like steel. Still, even as she spoke, unease gnawed at her, because deep down, she knew Carla was right. That afternoon, as Renee drove back to her precinct to quietly pull more arrest records, she felt eyes on her. Not the vague paranoia of suspicion. Real eyes. Watching. She parked across from Silverwood Galleria to observe, notebook in hand. Shoppers streamed in and out. Security guards hovered near entrances, radios buzzing. A young black mother clutched her purse tightly as she hurried inside. A teenage boy was shadowed by a guard, the same way she had been days earlier. It was happening in real time, right in front of her. The machine didn't even bother to hide. Her phone buzzed. A text from Carla. "You need to see this. Come back to the office." When she arrived, Carla had her laptop open, a spreadsheet glowing on the screen. "I pulled more cases," she said, gesturing. "It's worse than we thought." 47 arrests tied to Silverwood in the past year. 86% pled guilty. Every single probation handled by New Path Renee scanned the numbers, her stomach twisting. And the timing? Carla clicked to another tab. Spikes in arrests happen every quarter. Right before Harrington Holdings reports earnings, more arrests, more probation fees, higher profits. The air in the room grew heavier. This wasn't just corruption. This was corporate policy, a pipeline of exploitation designed, calculated, and profited from at the highest level. Before Renee could respond, her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Carla. It was another unknown number. The message was short. Cold. Last warning. Back off. Or Kayla pays the price. Renee's chest tightened. Her niece's face flashed in her mind, her laughter, her innocence. Carla saw the message over her shoulder. "Renee!" Renee gripped the phone until her knuckles turned white. "They just declared war." Carla's voice was urgent but steady. "Then we need allies. More than just us. If they're threatening your family, we can't fight this alone." Renee nodded slowly, her eyes burning with determination. "Then we find people who've been hurt by this system. We bring them together, and we show the city what's really happening." But even as she spoke, she knew the cost. Every step closer to the truth meant putting herself and the people she loved in more danger, and the machine had just shown it was willing to play dirty. That night, she parked her car in her driveway, scanning the streetlights, watching every shadow. For a moment, it was quiet. Too quiet. Until her headlights swept across her sedan. Her breath caught. Spray-painted in angry red letters across the hood were 2 words. Traitor. Dripping paint still glistened, fresh and wet. And carved deep into the metal below, scratched with a knife or key, were 5 more chilling words. "Keep your mouth shut, Captain." Renee froze in the driver's seat, the weight of betrayal pressing down on her. Only someone inside the department would know her rank. Only someone inside could have sent that message. Her suspicions snapped into focus. Someone she trusted had already sold her out. The machine wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside the walls she'd spent her life defending. And if she wasn't careful, it would devour her whole. The next morning, Renee Collins walked into her precinct with a file tucked under her arm and steel in her eyes. She ignored the stares, the whispers that followed her down the hallway. Everyone had read Price's report by now. Everyone had heard the gossip. She kept her head high. Let them whisper. She had bigger battles to fight. At her desk, she began pulling digital records quietly, methodically, arrest logs, incident reports, probation referrals. Patterns were starting to form, a trail of breadcrumbs too obvious for anyone with trained eyes to miss. Still, she felt the weight of isolation. Every door she opened could be the one that slammed shut on her career. Every colleague who smiled could be the one feeding information back to Harrington Holdings. That's why, when a knock came at her office door, her first instinct was suspicion. A young Latina woman stood in the doorway, notebook in one hand, press badge swinging from her lanyard. She couldn't have been older than 27, her dark eyes sharp, her expression fearless. "Captain Collins?" she asked. "My name's Elena Ramirez." City Herald. "Do you have a minute?" Renee nearly said no. Journalists had burned her before twisting words, chasing headlines. But something in Elena's gaze was different, determined. relentless. The same look Renee had worn in her 20s. "What do you want, Ms. Ramirez?" Renee asked cautiously. Elena stepped inside, lowering her voice. "I've been investigating Officer Price for months. Him and his ties to New Path Supervision Services. I have financial records, shell companies, wire transfers, but I can't connect the last dots without someone on the inside." Renee leaned back, studying her. "Why come to me?" "Because I saw the videos of your arrest. And because I think you're one of the few who actually cares about the truth." Elena hesitated, then added, "And I think you know what happens if we don't stop this. More people go to jail, more families drown in debt, more lives destroyed." For a long moment, the room was silent. Then Renee nodded toward the chair. "Close the door." They sat together, piecing fragments of truth. Elena had banking records showing large payments funneled from Harrington Holdings into offshore accounts. Emails hinting at quotas for arrests, masked under loss prevention initiatives. Even notes suggesting coordination between judges and mall executives. But Elena wasn't working alone. She had someone she wanted Renee to meet. That evening, they drove to a modest brick building on the city's south side, a community center that smelled faintly of coffee and floor polish. Inside, folding chairs circled around tables covered in papers and photographs. At the head of the table stood Reverend Marcus Green, a tall man with silver at his temples and the kind of voice that could fill a church or a protest line. "We've been waiting for you, Captain Collins," he said warmly, extending his hand. Around him sat teachers, small business owners, activists, and ordinary residents. People who had felt the machine grind them down. A barber whose son had been arrested for resisting. A teacher who'd lost her nephew to probation violations. Mothers who clutched photographs of their children, their faces heavy with pain. Elena leaned close and whispered, "This is the Justice Coalition. They've been collecting evidence for years, but no one in power would listen." On the table lay stacks of affidavits, sworn statements, medical reports, cell phone videos. Dozens of lives, each telling the same story. False accusations, violent arrests, pressure to plead guilty, probation fees that bled them dry. Renee flipped through the papers, her hands tightening with each page. A mother of 3 paying $300 a month to New Path, working double shifts to keep food on the table. A teenager shoved to the ground, charged with assault because he raised his arms to protect his face. A store clerk threatened with losing custody of her kids if she didn't accept a plea. "This isn't coincidence," Renee said, her voice low but steady. "It's a pattern." Organized, calculated. "Exactly," Reverend Green replied. "We've shouted ourselves hoarse, but they bury the complaints. That's why we document everything. We knew someday someone would have the power to help us break through," Elena added. "With your voice, with your badge. This story can't be ignored anymore." The weight pressed down on Renee's shoulders. These people looked at her like she was their last hope. After weeks of humiliation, betrayal, and threats, she finally saw it. She wasn't alone. She was standing at the edge of something larger than herself. But with that realization came fear. Because if Harrington Holdings had been bold enough to send threats to her home, what would they do to a room full of ordinary citizens daring to challenge them? As the meeting wrapped, Reverend Green clasped her hand. "Captain, you don't fight this battle alone anymore. We stand with you, and when the time comes, we'll stand in the open." Those words lingered in Renee's mind as she drove home, under the weight of night. The coalition had given her hope, yes, but also responsibility. She was carrying not just her own fight, but the fight of dozens, maybe hundreds. Pulling into her driveway, she noticed it again. That uneasy feeling. a wrongness in the air. Her front porch light flickered, dim then bright. She unlocked the door cautiously, stepping into silence. Everything looked normal. Living room neat, kitchen untouched. But when she reached her study, her heart stopped. Her father's old oak desk, the one with the hidden compartment where she had locked away Elena's documents, had been forced open. The lock splintered. Papers scattered across the floor like confetti. And the envelope, the one containing Harrington's internal memos, was gone. Her phone buzzed almost instantly. A new message. Next time it won't just be paper. Renee's grip tightened around the phone. Her chest rose and fell in heavy breaths. The machine wasn't just watching anymore. It had breached her home. And it had just declared open war. By morning, the official letter was waiting in Renee Collins's mailbox like a death sentence. Thick cream paper. The city's seal embossed in blue. Her name typed neatly at the top. She already knew what it would say before she slit it open. Immediate suspension, pending investigation, allegations of misconduct, badge and firearm to be surrendered. She sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in her hands, her badge lying cold and silent beside her. 20 years of service, reduced to a piece of metal and a form letter. The machine had moved fast, faster than she expected. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. News alerts flashed across the screen. Troubled police captain accused of shoplifting incident. Sources say suspended officer exhibits erratic behavior. Captain Collins' vendetta against mall security raises questions. Each headline twisted the knife deeper. She clicked one out of morbid curiosity. The article was a smear piece, citing anonymous sources within the department, describing her as unstable, vindictive, difficult to work with. The words blurred on the screen, her stomach churning. It was happening. The machine wasn't just trying to erase her career. It was trying to erase her reputation, her legacy, her name. Her phone rang again. This time her sister's name lit the screen. Renee let it go to voicemail. She couldn't bear to hear the worry in her family's voices. What would she say? That she was fine? That it would all work out? Lies stuck in her throat. She paced the apartment, blinds drawn tight, shadows stretching long across the floor. Every sound made her flinch. The rumble of a garbage truck, the buzz of a neighbor's lawnmower. Somewhere above, the drone of a news helicopter circling for footage of the troubled captain. Her laptop pinged with new emails. She opened them with numb fingers. From the police union. Given recent events, we cannot provide official support at this time. From her supervisor. Your behavior has disappointed the department. Cooperate fully with internal affairs. From an anonymous account. Should have kept your mouth shut. Hope you die, pig. Renee slammed the laptop shut. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Her badge and gun still sat on the coffee table, stripped of power. Symbols of everything she had believed in, now tainted by betrayal. She stared at them until her vision blurred, tears threatening to fall. She blinked them back. No time for weakness. Then the doorbell rang. She froze, instinctively reaching for the weapon she no longer had the right to carry. Cautiously, she checked the peephole. Her niece, Kayla, stood outside, backpack slung over her shoulder, eyes wide and worried. Renee opened the door quickly, pulling her inside. What are you doing here? You should be at school. Half day, Kayla said, dropping her bag. Without hesitation, she wrapped her arms around her aunt, clinging tightly. I needed to see you. For a moment, Renee stiffened. Then she melted into the embrace, the dam inside her cracking. She hadn't realized how much she needed that simple, unconditional love. "Mom's worried," Kayla whispered, still hugging her. "She's been calling. She thinks you're not okay. I just can't talk to anyone right now," Renee admitted softly. Kayla pulled back, her young face hardening with anger far beyond her years. "We know they're lying, Auntie Dee. Everyone at school knows too. Look." She pulled out her phone, showing a video already at 5.2 million views, the footage of Renee's arrest at the mall. The comments scrolled endlessly. "This is what systemic racism looks like. Captain Collins is a hero for standing up. We stand with you, Captain." "It's not just the video," Kayla said eagerly. "People are sharing their own stories. About Officer Price, about the mall security, about the whole corrupt system." "You started something?" Renee sank onto the couch, overwhelmed. "They're still calling me unstable. They're saying I made it all up, so what?" Kayla sat beside her, determination blazing. "The truth is out there now. People are watching, they're listening, and they're angry. Not at you. At them." She pulled up another page, a social media group with thousands of members. Each post was a story of harassment, false arrests, coerced pleas, a chorus of voices finally finding each other. "See?" Kayla squeezed her aunt's hand. "You're not alone. You're the only one brave enough to stand up, and now everyone else is standing with you." Renee's throat tightened. "When did you get so wise?" Kayla smiled faintly. "I learned from the best." The weight on Renee's shoulders eased just slightly. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. But that flicker turned to fire when she heard the chants. Distant at first, then louder, rising like a tide. She stepped onto the balcony, Kayla at her side. Down the street, dozens of protesters were gathering, their voices carrying through the neighborhood. "Justice for Collins! Justice for Collins!" Handmade signs bobbed in the air. "End profiling. Stop police corruption. We stand with Captain Collins." The sight made Renee's heart ache. Just days ago, she'd felt completely isolated. Now, strangers were filling the streets in her name. But even as she watched, she knew what would come next. Crowds attracted cameras. Cameras attracted pressure. Pressure attracted retaliation. The machine wasn't done. It was only recalculating. Her phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. This one sharper. Colder. "Crowds won't save you." TikTok. Renee looked at Kayla, then back at the chanting protesters. Hope surged in her chest, but so did fear. Because the breaking point wasn't just for her anymore. It was for everyone standing beside her. And the machine had just promised it was coming for them all. The marble steps of City Hall gleamed under the harsh glare of television lights. Dozens of cameras were already lined up outside, crews jockeying for space, reporters testing microphones. The story had exploded beyond Silverwood, beyond the city. The whole state was watching now. Renee Collins stood in the shadows of a side entrance, her blazer pressed, her shoulders squared, her captain's badge pinned inside her jacket. She had polished her shoes until they gleamed, not out of vanity but as armor. Every detail mattered tonight. In her hands was a folder stuffed with evidence. Arrest logs, financial trails, witness statements. Proof of everything the Justice Coalition, Elena Ramirez, and Carla Monroe had helped her uncover. But she knew evidence alone wouldn't save her. This wasn't just about facts. It was about fighting a machine that thrived on spectacle, intimidation, and spin. And tonight, she would give them a spectacle they couldn't control. Inside the council chamber, every seat was filled. People lined the walls, spilled into the hallway, their voices a low hum of tension. Protesters held signs even here. Justice for Collins. End the pipeline. At the front, the council members shifted in their seats, their eyes darting nervously between phones and cameras. Mayor Thompson dabbed sweat from his forehead, clearly wishing he could be anywhere else. Near the front row sat Logan Price, smug in his uniform, arms folded. Beside him, Charles Harrington, CEO of Harrington Holdings, whispered into his phone, face tight with irritation. They still thought they could control the narrative. They were about to learn otherwise. Renee waited in line with other citizens, her folder clutched tightly. Her palms sweated, but her voice in her head repeated the words she'd practiced 100 times in the mirror. My name is Captain Renee Collins. 2 weeks ago, I was falsely arrested. A commotion rippled through the chamber. Phones lit up across the room. People gasped, murmured, nudged each other. Price's smirk faltered. Harrington's head jerked up. Elena Ramirez's plan was working. The unedited footage of Renee's arrest, the footage showing Price whispering to the boutique manager before Renee even entered the store, had just gone live online. Screens glowed as people replayed the damning clip over and over. He set her up, someone whispered loudly. It was a setup. Mayor Thompson cleared his throat, trying to restore order. Next speaker, please. Renee stepped forward. Heads turned, whispers rippled, cameras swung toward her like magnets. She took her place at the podium, adjusted the microphone, and let the silence settle. My name is Captain Renee Collins, she began, her voice steady. 2 weeks ago, I was falsely arrested while shopping at Silverwood Galleria. The room erupted in murmurs again. Some gasped at the confirmation, others cheered. Price's face darkened. Harrington gripped the edge of his chair. But this isn't just about one incident of racial profiling, Renee continued, louder now. This is about a system. A system designed to target black citizens, funnel them into arrests, pressure them into plea deals, and profit from their probation. She opened the folder, laying documents across the podium. I have internal communications between mall executives and police officers. Communications that discuss quotas. Quotas that target demographics. I have financial records showing payments from Harrington Holdings to New Path Supervision Services. Payments that rise and fall with arrest numbers. And I have sworn statements from dozens of victims who lived through this abuse. The chamber buzzed like a hive. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for every word. She turned directly toward Price. The same Officer Logan Price who slammed me against a wall, cuffed me, and filed a false report claiming I assaulted him. Price shot to his feet, red-faced. Lies, he barked. She's lying. She's making it up to cover her. Sit down, officer. Sergeant Daniel Brooks's voice cut in from the back. He had come in quietly, but now all eyes turned toward him. She outranks you. And everything she's saying, it's backed by documents. The crowd gasped. Price's jaw worked furiously, but he froze under the weight of Brooks's calm authority. Renee pressed on. When I began investigating, I was suspended. My home was broken into. My family was threatened. But I am standing here anyway because this city deserves the truth. She held up a thumb drive. And the truth is right here. Emails between Price, Harrington, and even members of this very council. Emails discussing quotas, profits, and how to silence anyone who complained. The chamber erupted. Shouts, gasps, protesters cheered. Reporters shoved microphones closer. Mayor Thompson banged his gavel desperately. Order! We will have order! But it was too late. Renee's words were already out there, recorded, streamed, shared. And in that chaos, she saw it. The look on Harrington's face. Not fear, not guilt, something colder, calculating. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced down discreetly. A new message. Brave speech, Captain. Let's see if your niece makes it home tonight. Her blood ran cold. She looked back up, forcing her face to remain steady. But her mind raced. The crowd was roaring. The cameras were rolling. The truth was spilling out at last. But the machine had just drawn a new line in the sand. This wasn't just political anymore. It was personal, and Kayla's life now hung in the balance. And so Captain Renee Collins stood tall, not because she was unafraid, but because she refused to let fear dictate her story. She carried the bruises, the humiliation, the betrayal, but she also carried something more powerful: the truth. Her fight wasn't just for herself. It was for every voice that had been silenced, every family trapped in a system built to exploit them, every child who deserved to grow up believing justice is real. Tonight, you and I witnessed not just a confrontation in a mall, but the spark of something bigger. A reminder that dignity is worth defending, that courage is contagious, and that sometimes one act of defiance can ripple into an unstoppable wave. If this story made you feel something, anger, hope, even tears, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Let others see what happens when silence breaks and truth steps into the light. Because the fight isn't over. And maybe, just maybe, the next spark begins with you.